Well, hello there, and welcome to this walkthrough of assignment number 1 for CPI 111, a class on Game Maker. For assignment number 1, we're actually going to be doing a game that was used as the opening tutorial for earlier versions of Game Maker, for Game Maker 8 in particular. But we're going to be doing it in a newest or newer version of Game Maker Studio. So there are a few things in the tutorial that we'll be walking through that you'll find on our course website that need to change a little bit because they either work differently in Game Maker Studio or simply because they are no longer supported in Game Maker Studio. A little confusing for sure, but let's go ahead and get started. What you're going to want to have for this assignment is from the course Blackboard site. You'll want to go to assignment number 1 and you want to download a zip file that includes the sprites that we're going to use for this assignment and the audio. I'll show you what that looks like. Here I am on the course Blackboard site. This will of course change in terms of dates and the way it looks, and other things may change as well depending on when you're viewing this video. But we're looking now in the assignments folder. Here's assignment number 1, and you'll see there is an attached zip file here. You'll want to download that zip file to your local computer, and then you're going to want to unzip it so we can use it here. Again, when you are watching this video, depending on the semester in which you watch it, you may need to go somewhere else to get the latest version of the files that you're going to need. But at the time I'm recording this, here's what's included inside. There is a PDF called Assignment 1, Your First Game. This will have the walkthrough for the tutorial that we're going to do, for the game we're going to build. Again, designed for Game Maker 8, so we'll change a few pieces of it. And then we've got some sounds, and we've got some sprites. So once you've got that downloaded and unzipped, we can begin building our first game. So when you start Game Maker Studio, you're going to get this opening window. And we're going to choose New, and you'll want to take a look and note carefully where your project is going to be stored. In my case, I'm storing it by default. It goes into the Documents folder for me, and then into a folder called Game Maker and a folder called Project. And this is going to be our first assignment, so you should name this in a way that it will be easy for your instructor, me, or a grader who will be grading your assignments to know that the project that you've created belongs to you. So the project name should include your name at the beginning and then a name to signify which assignment it is. Once you've done that, it'll open up into Game Maker, and I need to resize it here so that you can see it in our recording. There we go. As this is our first assignment, you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with the interface for Game Maker Studio. I'm not going to go through that now. We will go through it in class, and of course you'll be introduced to it as we walk through this lesson. Alright, for our game, what we're going to create is a very simple game in which pieces of fruit are flying around on the screen at varying speeds and in various directions. And when the player clicks on a given piece of fruit, then they earn some points. Along with the fruit flying around, there's going to be a bomb or more than one bomb flying around on the screen, and if the player accidentally clicks on one of those bombs, then the game ends and they lose. Essentially, they keep playing until they hit a bomb. All right? Here's the common process through which you can develop pretty much every game that you create in Game Maker. Of course, they'll get more complex as time goes on, but this general set of steps works pretty well. First, you'll want to spend some time outside of GameMaker carefully considering what your game is going to look like, what its rules are, what its goals are, what are the play mechanisms, and so on. And we'll talk about that in class a little bit. But assuming you've done all of that, you can begin to assemble your game. First of all, we're going to bring in some sprites. To bring in sprites, you're going to click on the little icon that looks sort of like a Pac-Man character. That will open up the sprite import window. From here, you can click on Load Sprite, and then you're going to search for the folder that you've downloaded and expanded, the assignment 1, your first game 1 in this case. And we're going to come in here, we're going to grab this image, this wall image, bring it in, and we're going to name it. It's a good idea in any game development tool, but GameMaker is no exception, to use a consistent naming scheme for the things that you bring into your project. So I'm going to use a string of characters to identify the type of thing I'm bringing into GameMaker each time I create something. So here we're going to have a sprite, so I call it SPR, and then I do underscore, and I'm going to call it then wall. And I'm also going to check this precise collision checking, and then I'm going to deselect this separate collision masks. Probably don't need this, but it's sort of a nice habit to get into if we're going to be doing things where we're going to be doing some collision detection. Now, depending on how you set up your game, there are times where you don't need or want precise collision checking. Precise is challenging if you've got complex sprites in terms of their shape, because it's harder for the program to check those things. But that's how we're going to set it up right now. So we'll say OK. We're going to bring in a second sprite. We'll choose the Apple image. Name it SPR underscore Apple. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing here with precise collision checking and deselecting the separate collision mask box. All right. We've got a couple of sprites. Just to show you the order of creating things, we're going to move away from sprites in the moment and create some objects from these sprites. To do that, I'm going to go up to the Create Object tool, click on that, and I'll name this first one using a good naming scheme, OBJ underscore wall. And then I'm going to choose the wall sprite that we brought in. And we've got some settings down below. We'll get into these in later assignments, but for now we just want to check solid. Along with these settings, there are events and actions that we can assign to our object in order to allow it to work inside our game, to interact to user input or to interact with other objects. In this case, our wall is not going to do much. It's just going to sit there, so I don't have to do anything. I could just say, OK. Let's create another object for our Apple image. Call this one obj underscore Apple. This one we don't actually have to make solid. We're going to have some events and actions that are going to take care of the what we want to have happen with this object. However, we want this apple to actually do a few things, so we're going to need to add some events and some actions. The first event we're going to add is called Create. So I click on the Add Event button, and then I can choose from a set of predetermined events. I'm going to choose Create. And I'm going to decide what I want to have happen when this Apple object is created in my game. When it first appears in the game is really what this means. And what I want it to do is to move about on the screen in a random direction. So if I look over on the right-hand side, there's a whole palette of built-in actions that can be performed by any given object. You can also use scripting, we'll get into that later in the course, to perform even more sophisticated or custom actions that you might want to do. But for now, we'll just use the built-in set. I'm going to choose this very first one with the set of green arrows called Move Fixed. And to choose it, I can double-click, or actually I can click and drag to drop it over into the palette of actions. When I do that, I'm going to get a window that allows me to set some parameters associated with that action. I can choose where I want the move to be applied, and I want it to be applied to the apple itself, so I choose self. And then for directions, by selecting all of these arrows pointing off in different directions, I can make it so that GameMaker will randomly choose one of these directions and have the apple start moving in that direction when the game begins. Here on the speed, I can set how fast I want the apple to move, and I say OK. There are some more things we want to have happen with this apple object. For one thing, we want it to bounce off the walls when it collides with them. So I'm going to add another event. This time I'm going to choose collision. And I want to have something happen when it collides with the wall. And when it collides with the wall, I want it to bounce off. So over here in the actions, I'm going to stay here on this move set, but I'm going to come down now to the jump section. And here is one that's called collide. Drag that over. I'm going to apply it to the apple, and then I can leave the rest of this as is. It's going to bounce off when it hits a solid object. And remember that when we created our wall object, we checked the box that said solid. So anytime the apple hits any wall, it's going to bounce off. We say, OK. There's another action we'd like our apple to perform, and that is that when the player clicks on the apple, we want to do a couple things. First of all, we want the apple to disappear from the location where it's clicked and then reappear in a different location on the screen and keep moving. And we're going to give the player some points to reward them for clicking on the apple. So let's do that now. I'm going to choose Add Event. I want to have something happen when they click the mouse, so I'm going to choose Mouse. And then I've got a bunch of options, and I'm going to choose Left Button. So when the player clicks the left mouse button, some actions will occur. First of all, we're going to move that apple to some random location. So I come to the Jump section here on the Move palette, choose the Jump to Random, drag it over, and just leave the settings as they are. And I want to give some points to the player, so I'm going to click on the Score tab, come to the top section, which is Score, choose the first action, which is Set Score. And I'm going to give the player 20 points, because it's not moving very fast, so it's going to be pretty easy to click on it. And I want to choose this relative option, which means that each time the player clicks on an apple, their score will increment by 20, so they can accumulate points. And I'll say OK. I'll save all of that. So we've got a couple of objects that exist in our game so far, but they don't actually exist anywhere. In order for them to do something, we need to create a scene or a room in the language of GameMaker, and then put these objects into that room. So let's create that room now. Before I do that, I'm going to save my work so far. I come up to my toolbar again and go over and click this button, which is the Create a Room button. I'm going to expand this out a little. And I'm going to change the dimensions of my room. Here I am in the settings for my room. You can see I've got the width at 1024 and the height by 768. I'm going to lower that down to 640 by 480. And when I do that, then I don't need to have this expanded out so much anymore. Now I can see the full room here. I'm going to check that I've got my Snap X setting and my Snap Y setting both set to 32. This is the default. This will allow us to position sprites nicely because they will snap to these little squares that we see laid out in a grid here. In our case, the sprites that we're using with our objects just happen to be 32 by 32, so they're going to line up very nicely inside our room. When you're working with sprites in your own game, it's often useful to create them so that they match the dimensions of some snap setting that you have in here, or some multiple of this snap setting. Okay. We also now can begin to add some objects to our room. And we've only got a couple of objects. We've got our wall and our apple. And the one we're going to position out here first is the wall. So to choose an object to position in the room, you'll come to the center of this objects palette, click on the drop-down menu, and then you'll see a list of all the objects that are currently in your project, and we want the wall. To position it, you simply move your mouse out into the room and click. Because we've got the snap setting to 32 by 32, it will nicely snap into that little square. Then you can just walk along and start to position them out in the room. We're going to have these wall objects all along the outer sides of our room. So you can click one at a time. You also can do things a little more quickly. If you notice here, you've got some commands you can do on the keyboard along with your mouse in order to make adding and deleting these objects a little faster. So I want to add multiple objects, so I can hold down Shift and Control, and then I can just start dragging with my mouse, and those tiles will all go out along the outer edge. Now you'll see in my case that I screwed up, and I've got a couple of these objects that are outside my room. I'd like to get rid of them. So what I can do is hold down the Control key and the right mouse button, and that will delete those. Once I've got my walls all set to go, then I'd like to place a couple of apples out into the room. So I'm going to click on the drop-down menu, select the apple object, and I'll just place them here and there out in the room. Once I've got things set up the way I like, I can click check. Just briefly before we go, you'll see there are some other things in here. There are tiles, there are physics, there are views. We will play with some of these later, but we're not going to worry about them yet. All right, so we can just click on check, and that will close that, and we'll click on the save button. Now let's take a look and see what we've got so far. To play your game, to try it out, you can click on this play button in the toolbar. When you do that, you'll see here in the console window that the game will start to compile. It'll send a whole bunch of messages, and then you'll see your game start running. And what happens here is our little apples start moving up and down. And if I click on them, they move to a different location. What we don't see now is that I'm gaining points as I click on these. We need to show these points, and we'll do that a little bit later in our project. So that's the beginning of our game. Let's continue on and add some more objects and add some sound and add some other good pieces to this project in the next part of this video.